All right, greetings, MechWarriors. So we've got our last installment here. We're going to be finishing off the base. We'd built last time. I primed it black with some airbrush primer, and then I put some Rhinox hide on the earthy parts. I did 2 layers of that and just kind of did it and waited for it to dry, just so we wouldn't be sitting here watching paint dry slowly. So that's a kind of a ready brown. You can mix a purple and a brown if you have a medium brown that you want to use. I'm going to keep it on the model holder because it's just easier for me to kind of spin it around and work it with all angles. We're going to sponge or stipple in some lighter browns with Steel Legion Drab and Xandri Dust here, just so we have a little bit of a variation going on. We're going to use this Ash Gray for the concrete, mix in a little bit of white for some highlights, and some Nuln Oil for a thin down wash kind of all over the whole thing. And then for the rebar metal bits, some Iron Warriors, and maybe a little bit of metal color just to highlight that as well. I've just got an old beat up kind of dry brush that's seen better days. All right, so yeah, we're going to shake up our Steel Legion. I'm just going to put a little dab of that and a little bit of the Xandri Dust on my wet palette. And then again, this is just to introduce a little bit of variation in the color of the base in the ground part. Alright, I just like to get them both set up. All my colors out and ready to go, so I'm not having to stop over and over and over and fiddle with anything. Actually, we'll put out our gray and our white as well. So gray by itself, gray to mix with some white. And if you have to squeeze your dropper bottle past a certain point, it's best to just stop and unclog it. Otherwise, it's going to pressure up and shoot out all over your wet palette or your desk. There you go. Perfect. Groovy. So, it's my dry brush is dry. Sometimes I'll get it a little bit of water over here. I'll just get it a little bit damp. Brush off the dampness. All right, we'll grab a little bit of our Steel Legion. Same thing, just mark off a little bit on a paper towel. And now I'm just kind of just stipple. It's kind of like an overbrush, I guess, more than a dry brush, because it's still going to be a little bit wet. So with the wet paint that I grab here, I'm going to kind of stab it in a stippling motion onto the base. And then as I stab it off, you'll see that I'd say a little bit more loaded of a brush or a little bit thicker paint is nice, just because it leaves a higher amount of actual paint on the base. And I'll kind of build this up towards the raised sections. And again, ground wouldn't be perfectly even colored or anything. Don't worry about getting it up on the rocks right now either. Not a big deal. We just want some variation, so it's not just flat brown. And I also really don't enjoy having like kind of one homogenized base color, like putting sand down or something like that, or a sand effect. I think that's pretty good. It's a nice kind of transition. I still got a fair amount of Rhinox hide in there, but a little bit brighter areas. Yeah, I don't like to have one, like if you put sand down and then you put kind of a basing effect or PVA or something to solidify and set your sand, and then you do one solid color over top of that and then just dry brush it, I find it's just a little bit lackluster sometimes. So I like to kind of sponge on or stipple on colors, go back and forth. And I'm doing a little brighter than, should mix these two a little bit brighter than I usually would do, because we're going to do an all over thin down black wash of Nuln Oil once the concrete is done as well. Yeah, I think that's fine. You could do, actually, if I was inclined to do a more detailed kind of base, I would probably do a black wash for the concrete portions, and then I would do specifically brown wash for the bottom, or for the earth parts. Okay, so just a little bit nicer brush, the better tip on it, a little bit of water mixed in with our gray here. All right, we are just going to pick out the cement portions or the concrete portions. And I'm not worried about getting it on the metal or the rebar. You could do a dark red for the rebar if you wanted to. I'm probably just going to do it metallic. Maybe we'll do like a slight rust effect, I guess. But I did one previously earlier this week, and it looked fine with a couple different varying shades of rust on it, but actually it was a little too busy. I find if I'm painting models that are plain, I like to have a little bit more exciting base to complement them, just so there's a little more overall kind of wow factor going on. And I'm making sure right now not to paint any of the dirt. I'm fine with dirt creeping up on the concrete. I don't want to be painting the dirt gray. I suppose it's possible that you would have some concrete dust, but worked around a lot of rubble and debris earlier in my trades career, and usually it's not giant piles of fine gray dust everywhere. Yeah, that looks good. So we're going to give that just a quick minute to dry. And then we'll dab on some lighter gray. Because again, it wouldn't be, you could kind of blend your concrete, I guess, but it shouldn't look super smooth. Especially if it's just like cement itself, dry cement doesn't look super smooth, but smashed and beat up and chipped stuff certainly wouldn't. So I'm going to mix this white in with the gray, lighten it up. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of gray and mix it into the white. That'll be more effective. There you go. That's about as light as I'd like to go. Mix it up my water. Just going to blow in a bit. Just check my brush. It's pretty dry. I always just like to check and make sure that it's not, it's brushed on my hand. Just make sure that it's not streaking water or damp, whatever, before I start. I don't want it too wet. And this is just a very light kind of stipple at first, and then back and forth. No real pressure on it. Oop. I feel like I stabbed it into the dark paint there, or the dark gray. Yeah, looks good. Yeah, these basing bits are really fantastic. A lot of detail. We're gonna put a little bit more white on the palette here, just because as I'm dry brushing it, I'm seeing there's a lot of awesome definition and variation in the cement wall, and I don't want to miss out on that. So, okay, a little bit of gray, just a tiny bit, and then we're gonna mix it predominantly white here. Actually, we'll mix a little more gray in. It is not an exact science. We're just looking for increasing amount of contrasts. So start with your main gray or your dark gray, add in a little bit of white, giving it all over. If you ever feel like it maybe could use another highlight, that probably means it could use 2 more highlights. That's kind of my mentality I go with. Oh, let's make sure you can see. There you go, yeah. So just a nice, easy light back and forth. And we're getting a lot of nice definition there. It's going to stipple on a little bit too. Because, well, the edges do look like, yeah, there you go. Just a little bit. I'm fine with that. I want a powdery kind of look or finish to it. That's what I'm going for. Back and forth, top down. Groovy. And then just a couple more specific directional brushes. Actually, it looks like there's a... Oh, no, it's rebar. Okay, all right. I was going to say, it looked like there was an I-beam buried in the cement, which is interesting, but nope, it is just very detailed rebar sticking up. Yeah, that looks good. If we can get it in focus. Yeah, it looks so good. You did an awesome job on these bits pieces, which again you can order straight from epicbasing.com, or you can get the files to print them yourself, or buy the files and get a friend that prints stuff to print for you. All right, clean that off, stick that away. I think we'll switch to got a old sharp brush I use for my metallics. And I'm not too worried about being super highlighted here because the model is very busy and very exciting looking, so we don't want to take away from it too much by having too much going on in the base. But I do want to pick out some of these really nice rebar and metal bits here. And then after this, we'll give it a quick wash with a Nuln Oil or black wash. Oh man, there's a little my lights are a little bit in the way for getting nice and close on this guy. I'm trying my hardest not to get a lot of metal on the concrete. But normally I put it right up to my eye. In the past, I've made some urban rubble style bases using like plasticard, some brass rod, or kind of cut up wood spindle type things, or doweling, and then just kind of stacked it to be kind of like piping, I guess, like a pile of metal pipes. And then you just prime it all, build it all, set it in some sand, and then prime it all black, and then work from there. But this is much easier and much more realistic looking. I think we're looking pretty good. Again, there's not really any in that front pile. The front pile is just purely a concrete debris pile, no rebar or to speak of. Awesome, I like that. Okay, now we're going to actually what we'll do is a little bit backwards. We're going to normally I would edge the base last, So do like a black rim around it. Very last, and I would use black wash first, but I'd like to close up my wet palette and use another palette on top of it. So we're just gonna finish our physical painting with a brush off the palette first, and then we'll do the black wash last. Is the last thing we do. All right, and this brush is terrible. This is my airbrush mixing brush. As you can see, it's got a crazy big hook on the end there. So if you've got a nice brush, feel free to use that. Just pretty comfortable using this gnarly thing. Not very accurate. A little bit of holding your breath going on. Painting in the periphery. Oh. That's all right. As again, I'm painting where it's comfortable for me and not under the camera. Okay, here we go. Last pass. Yeah, just right up to the edge of the hex there. And I'm just going to reinforce that a little bit because I see the black kind of thinned out a tiny bit. Just checking around, making sure there's no thin spots where I can see colors through. Oh, that'll dry nice and matte. Perfect. And actually, we'll just push this out of the way. And grab our... Actually, to be honest, that looks pretty nice as is. I would say, if anything, just a very, very thin wash. A lot of times it looks like you don't need it, but then when you put it on, it does. And a little bit more depth. So I've got just a pipette here. I get a little bit wet first from water from my water cup. 1, 2, 3. 3 drops of Nuln oil. And then I've got a kind of a large bottle of just plain distilled water. I can squirt in just a little bit. Mix that up. And then we'll check the consistency on our paper towel here. Yep. Oh yeah, that's bleeding nicely. And that should give us just a little bit of shadow. Yep, that looks good. Yeah, really, it's really barely decipherable, which is what we're looking for. We're not looking to massively shade or shadow anything, or I just want a little bit of a hint of something darker in the recesses and the crevices and all the rock piles and stuff here. And then it'll dry and give a little bit more of a natural finish. Whenever you like dry brush something, it's a little bit hard now to see because it's wet, but whenever you dry brush something, if you get the powdery kind of finish that we had, which is not bad, I don't mind that, especially on something that's dry, a dry surface in real life. But I like to still put a thin down wash to kind of, I don't know, give it. You're not really tinting it; it's just like a cohesive finish to it, in terms of like having a model that you're looking at. Seems to add a lot. A lot of times I'll airbrush aggressively brighter and brighter colors. And then on the top, after the very top highlight, I will do a very thin wash of whatever color I was airbrushing, just to give it a little bit more surface variation, and it doesn't look purely airbrushed or as unrealistic. But that is our base. It is going to dry, and we will hit it with a quick shot of just matte varnish. A lot of times you want to varnish it if you're handling it, obviously, but I'll do it as just a cohesive finish. So it'll lock everything in with the same texture, and it'll actually help the details pop out quite a bit. So that is our guy, and we'll get some pictures of him mounted on his base. And I hope you enjoyed following along. And if you have any questions, as always, please let me know. Happy to help.